Hi and welcome to the Geek Legion of Doom. This is a horror movie review and I'll be having a look at the movie Inbred. So Inbred is a British horror comedy movie. I believe it was released in 2012, and as you can probably guess by the title, it's about kind of a inbred Texas Chainsaw Massacre type sort of movie. And basically the story follows a group of young offenders, 4 kind of teenagers who have been taken off to this kind of the more sort of rural area of the UK, and if you're not from the UK, it's a place called Yorkshire, and it's a dark and foreboding place according to this movie. And they've sort of been taken out by these 2 sort of counsellors to reconnect and go do sort of team building, that kind of stuff. And they kind of go into this, you know, very sort of rural village, and ultimately come across these sort of these local people who are not used to outsiders, so to speak. And ultimately they kind of end up sort of clashing. And as it turns out, these local people are kind of strange Texas Chainsaw Massacre kind of inbred people who like to do sort of just slaughter people for fun ultimately, and this begins a sort of game of cat and mouse as sort of the group of I guess, you know, city folk are sort of captured, and ultimately some of them are sort of tortured for sort of the amusement of the rest of the village. And then a group of them manage to escape, and ultimately it's sort of what happens is that these sort of escapees and sort of trying to get away from these kind of crazy local people. So that'll give you, you know, a good idea about obviously what the film's like. It's not a particularly original story. We've kind of seen this sort of thing done with these kind of like sort of backward redneck sort of films before, many times before. But I have to say, I actually did enjoy this movie. It's very, very inventive for its relatively low budget. Now let me get the negatives out of the way first. There's a couple of negative points here. It is a low budget movie, and there are some, the actual gore effects here are pretty damn good for its budget. However, they do kind of use some kind of CGI sort of gore with it as well, and it does seem a little bit jarring at times. There's a good amount of practical effects in it as well. There is a fair amount of kind of CGI blood and CGI gore, and I guess because of the budget, it does sort of stand out a little bit as well. And the second thing I would say is, even though this is a fairly gory film, it takes a little while to get going, and there are a couple of moments, even when it is going, it does sometimes drag a bit. There's 2 sort of extended sort of torture scenes, so to speak, and I actually think they maybe just drag on a little bit too long. And I guess the last criticism I would say is some of these sort of locals are maybe portrayed as a little bit too cartoony, because I have to say the acting on this movie is pretty good. I think everyone does a pretty decent job of kind of really sort of selling their sort of characters, and admittedly some of these sort of young offenders are not likable people, but they're not meant to be. So some of the criticisms I've seen that the protagonists ultimately are unlikable. That's true, but they're not meant to be. They're meant to be young offenders. They're not meant to be you know, good Samaritans ultimately. But I think they do a pretty decent job of acting there for sort of various roles. There is kind of, I guess, some who are more sympathetic than others. Nevertheless, the kind of, I guess, the bad guys, so to speak, the antagonists, sometimes are a little bit cartoony. You'll sort of see there's kind of, they almost have like this live show where they're going to do these sort of torturings and things like that. And so some of the faces that these sort of like the sort of, I guess, the extras are sort of pulling to sort of try and make them look inbred, and have these sort of big, sort of like obviously false buck teeth and stuff. It looks a little bit cartoony. It's kind of meant to be a horror comedy, I appreciate that, but I think they did such a good job in the acting, it almost detracts from it a little bit. But it is a really fun movie. I think it's for the budget, it's you know, it's very, very good. I mean, the gore effects are very inventive. There's lots of inventive kills here, and kind of quite gruesome things that actually happen to these poor folks. And it does give you a kind of you know, a good sense of foreboding. It's just sometimes it's kind of gets a little bit cartoony, and it's a bit of a shame really, because it would have been nice if it was maybe played a bit sort of straighter, because it would have really been kind of quite terrifying. And I think because it does have these kind of, I don't know, a little bit more kind of like sort of comedy moments, it almost detracts from it a little bit. It's still but it's really an entertaining movie, very interesting characters. You know, I thought everyone did a pretty good job. I don't really have too many criticisms that are kind of any weight. It's a real fun film. If you're a gorehound, if you can kind of get past the the kind of CGI sort of side of it sometimes. I think it's a really decent, decent entry into this kind of like backwards redneck inbred sort of sub-genre that we sort of have in horror here, and I really enjoyed it. It's actually far better than I thought it was going to be. So I'm going to give this movie a 7.5 out of 10. I thoroughly enjoy it. I recommend it if you like these kind of movies. Go check it out. Let me know what you think. Leave me a comment. I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.